Joel, how are you?
I'm still Joel. I'm fine.
Yeah.
There you go.
You guys in Prescott?
Joel, please go get dressed.
I got dressed on Sunday. Why would I get dressed today?
Hey, Myra, nice to see you.
Honey,
Thanks,
Rabbi.
thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
What a beautiful smile. How are you today?
I'm pretty good. How are you? You look nice too.
How come your hair looks so great?
I curled it, washed it. It's so hot, I had to.
Hi, Myra.
It looks wonderful.
Hi, how are you? I'm a licensed hairstylist.
Are you really?
Yes.
I didn't know you had that hidden talent.
Well, I was looking for an electrologist school many years ago.
Uh-huh.
And they only had 2 pages on electricity at the school. I ended up getting the license anyway. Cut my husband's hair.
You're a good advertisement for your skill.
I don't practice. Only on me.
Uh-huh.
And the dog.
Anything else anyone has to report good and welfare wise before we jump in with the continuation?
Keller.
Has anybody heard anything about Ginny Keller was the question.
Oh, Ginny is apparently doing great. The surgery went super well. It should encourage you, Carol. And she said the pain from the sciatica is gone.
Oh, fantastic. She's in choir.
Hi, Carol.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
So that was great news from Ginny.
Oh, I'm so happy for her.
Yeah.
You have to have surgery?
Yeah. Carol, we're not sure if Carol's going to have surgery. She kind of is hoping to, just to get out of pain.
That's a typical thing that happens to those of us in that age group, because I have a really good friend who's in bed now, most of the sciatica.
Well, this is the sciatica.
Oh, it's a
Spinal stenosis.
right? Spinal stenosis.
Joe and Carol, I think you need to get a little closer to your microphone, if you don't mind, or bring it closer to you.
I will do my very best. How's that?
I can't.
Way better.
That's
good.
Thank you.
Yeah, Carol, you just don't move. Let him move the computer.
The nice thing about laptops, they're portable, so we can get them.
So nice. So we are in our Getting Good at Getting Older book. We're on page 52. We're working our way through this chapter and taking our time because there are a lot of really wonderful, thought-provoking exercises in this book. This one, I think we're going to have to streamline a little bit because otherwise we could spend a year just on this one exercise, which is number 2. So what Reb Zalman is talking about is he wants us to take like this giant sheet of paper and put all of our age categories in increments of 7, like the sabbatical year. So 0 to 7, ages 8 to 14, ages 15 to 21, and then put every month and try to remember what we were doing every month during that age group. It overwhelmed me just thinking about it. So what I'd like to do is kind of streamline that and look at each age category, and then he has some specific questions. There are 3 of them. You see ABC on the bottom of the page. What were significant moments and events of each phase of life? Who were the people who guided and influenced you during each period? And what did each phase contribute to the continuum of your life? So here's first of all, did anybody read this and actually do the exercise as designed? Sandra Kane, go to the head of the class.
It's about
Sandra Kane, JD. So
She's the most responsible woman I know.
she's amazing. So tell us a little bit about what you took away from that, and then I'll talk about how I think we can approach it for our purposes, that'll be a little more accessible.
Well, okay, there's a lot of information to put down here in my, if you,
Yeah.
my handwriting. This is what I wrote. So I think it was from dependence to independence to balancing things in my life versus, you know, trying to, well, to law school and trying to do a career while I had a child. And so I was trying to be super mom. And then, you know, standing on my own and just kind of a lot of different phases, loss and growing and healing.
Did you find it worthwhile? The time? How much time did it take you to put this all together?
Oh, maybe about an hour.
Oh, wow. Well, you're fast also.
No.
I would imagine that there must have been some age groups that were hard. Were there things that you remembered that were like, wow, I hadn't thought about that?
Yeah, I haven't really, you know, thought about some of these things in a while, but I think overall it was growing towards becoming a better person, becoming more independent, but, you know, being more balanced.
How long have you and your husband been married?
David and I, about
Yeah.
7 years.
Mhm.
You're up. Okay,
Thank you.
I'll get your pen.
Thank you.
Hello, Len. Where are
Yes.
you? Hi.
How are you guys?
We are fantastic. Where are you joining us from?
Where's your bride?
Where do I?
Where's your bride?
Carol wants to know
My
where's your
bride, come here, my bride. We gotta get my bride over here. Here she is. Get your bride in here. There's.
Hello, how are you?
Hi, Joe and Carol. Hi, Joe and Carol. Good. I'm having a lot of trouble with my back, my leg. We're gonna lose it.
Okay. Thank you. I'm honored to be joining this group.
We are delighted to have you. Don't know if you have a copy of this book. This is the book that we're working on. It's
Yes, I've been actually. I'm up to
Oh, you're all
exercise too.
perfect. That's just where we are. So, did you go through the exercise on your own?
You want to do, make it.
Another
Yes.
good student.
Yes.
So, Sandra.
You know, January. I found out that I'm past December, so I don't know if I'm. You know, I have to figure out what do I do after December.
Well, you know, what was interesting was I looked at that 78 to 84, and then, you know, he puts and beyond in parentheses. But I remember somebody saying to me that, you know, just one of those little moments of aging and becoming aware of aging is when she was filling out a form and it was, you know, are you under 18? Are you under 35? Are you, you know, 36? Are you 75 plus? And, you know, it's like, okay, I got to the last category. You know, there was something, you know, kind of wistful about that moment. Talk about a reminder of aging, like there's nowhere else to go. This is as old as I get. But it is
The only part about aging that I get upset with is when I'm filling out a form and they say month, day, and then you go to year and it starts at 2020 and you're scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. It's very depressing.
We've all had that experience, that's for sure. So
One thing for me is, as I was going through this, and I probably did 3/4 of what I was going through, was how much Diane was an influence of me, for me, through all those various stages. Because I kept on saying, who else was influencing me during all those years and all those events? And I kept on coming back more often than not that Diane was influencing me all those years, all those events.
Yeah.
So that was kind of interesting, just to,
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
stepping back, it was.
You were married how many years?
No,
52.
52. So, you know, one would imagine that that would be the case.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Exactly.
somebody's got a phone in the background. Who's got a phone going in the background?
Not me.
All right. So if you have a background noise or something you need to do, just please mute yourself so that we can hear the person who's speaking. So Sandy, you managed to knock this whole thing off in an hour. And I like the way you describe the transitions, you know, from dependence to independence to finding balance.
Yeah, I was one of those people, you know, during Women's Lib, you know, that you could do it all. And so I tried to do it all, and it was not an easy process. And then having to really do it all when I got divorced. And so, you know, and then just a lot of evolutions to standing on my own and learning more about being balanced.
And Len, what were some of your takeaways from the process?
As far as the different years or different months are concerned? Or
Yeah, just your experience of doing this
I'm
exercise.
with you.
First of all, how much time did it take you? Because I was a little overwhelmed by, you know, what kind of time commitment this might involve.
Okay. I only spent about an hour on it. And yeah, so I only spent an hour on it. But what it was for me was seeing how, in one sense, I'm 75 years old, but on the other hand, and I'm in great physical condition, thank God. But on the other hand, I feel like I'm 12, and you know, I act like a kid more than I act like an adult. And so that was very revealing to me, because I never looked at it that way before.
Oh, well, that's great if you can, you know, take away some insight. All right, so 2 people completed the exercise. They both did it in an hour or so. So maybe it's not as big of a deal as I'm thinking it is. So that's an encouragement to everybody to consider to do this individually for yourselves. What I thought is, like, let's just take the age groups. So 0 to 7, and we're looking at significant moments and events, people who guided and influenced you, and what did each phase contribute to the continuum of your life. I'm guessing most people would say, as far as guides and influences from ages 0 to 7 would be your parents. Does anybody have a different response than your parents from ages 0 to 7?
Also,
Well,
grandparents.
for me, the influencing individual, not the influencing, but something that struck in my mind, was my first grade teacher. She was truly a tough cookie. You could not look sideways because she would yell at you. She would physically grab you and shake you. So from that point on, I realized the importance of paying attention in school. So the significant events were obviously going to kindergarten and the first grade. Those things still stick in my mind about what it was like to start my schooling, my education process. And yes, clearly my parents were an influencer, but in terms of the educational process, it was that first grade teacher that I still have fears that she's going to come by and shake me.
I love that, Frank, that you still remember your first grade teacher, that she made such an influence. I have a vague memory of my first grade teacher, and kind of just the opposite, that it, you know, was a very kind, loving experience. I didn't start to get traumatized by teachers till probably 5th grade. Mom, do you remember Mr. Ergo that I had in 5th grade? You remember Mr. Ergo?
Yes, I do.
What do you remember about him?
He was very tough.
Yeah.
Very tough.
Yeah.
But I remember from I don't remember parents. I was very sick when I was about 4 or 5 years old. And that's what I remember. I remember being very sick, and I remember clearly some of the singings. I must have been about 5 years old when I was sick in the house. And they actually did surgery in the house in my mom's bedroom.
It was something with the ear. What was it?
Yeah, a mastoid, yeah. And that must traumatize that whole age group, because between 1 and 7, that's the only thing I can think of.
Excuse me 1 second. I just self-cleaned my oven and it won't stop beeping. So talk among yourselves. The topic is ages 0 to 7. And what I really want to know also is, were you in the same place from age 0 to 7, or did your family move at all?
I remember when I went to first grade, I had a very kind, sweet teacher who I really liked. Then we moved in the middle of the year, and the second first grade teacher I had was a real witch. I don't think she really liked children, and so it was very, very traumatic for me to go from this kind, supportive classroom to a very strict, cold kind of a environment the second half of the year.
It's funny, and now that you guys talk about first grade, I remember the name of my first grade teacher. Why I would remember that, and my kindergarten teachers. I don't think I could give you too many other names, but my kindergarten and first grade teachers' names I remember, which is crazy.
I had 2 very vivid. I started this and I decided I'm not going beyond 7. I don't know, Len. I don't know you, but I think we have a lot in common. So
Yeah, definitely.
I have 2 very vivid memories, one in kindergarten and one in first grade. The one in kindergarten was on my very first day of kindergarten, and this was substantiated to me many, many years later. They apparently took my height and weight and determined on the first day of kindergarten I was 28 pounds overweight, which is a lot of weight. So I was a very heavy child. I was actually an obese child during that period of time.
This is explaining so much, Joel.
I knew you would like this, Bonnie. So the second part, though, was in first grade. I was obviously a big kid, not only heavy, but a big kid. And I was I grew up in Pittsburgh, and in first grade, Dr. Jonas Salk, who was in our neighborhood and whose children attended our elementary school, came and gave my class our polio vaccine.
Wow.
And I continuously shoved other kids in front of me so that I was the very last person to get that vaccine. But that is probably my greatest claim to fame, is Dr. Salk himself inoculated me against polio.
That is
First grade.
Was that the little drink thing? You had to drink it, or
No.
Not a
That
shot.
was Dr. from Cincinnati. I forgot his name. That was a number of years
Sabin.
later. That was
Sabin.
Yeah.
Sabin, right.
Because the another
So,
thing that I
no,
remember.
this was the vaccine. This was the actual shot.
Yeah,
So anyway, that was clearly the best part of my life.
Oh,
So Len, if you don't know Joel, one of the famous things to know about him is that he goes to the gym about 3 hours a day minimum. So clearly he was traumatized as a kindergartner and he's still trying to get past it.
Well, wait a minute. I go 3 hours, but I do it once a year. Does that count?
Yeah, it's the same concept, Len.
Is that going to shul or going to the gym, Len?
Whoa.
I don't think he's going to answer that.
Oh, that's funny. Real funny.
Well, I remember being at Shady Grove Elementary School and being on the safety patrol. So I would stand and escort kids across the street, this little street that was at the elementary school. And I felt very proud and like I had just a little bit of power, and just enjoyed that role.
Yeah, so a helper even at a young age.
Mhm.
So I don't know if this is a memory or if it's something just I've heard the story, but when I was in, now they call it preschool, then we called it nursery school, one day
Right.
changed the name of the street that I lived on. And we did move when I was 0 to 7. So I remember before we moved into the house that I grew up in, being in the neighborhood and going to watch the construction with my parents as the house was being built. And then we moved into that house, and the van would pick me up for nursery school. And while I was at nursery school, they changed the name of the street. And the van came to bring me home at the end of the day and couldn't drop me off because they couldn't find my street. They had to bring me back to the school and call my parents and have them come get me. And that was a little early trauma, not getting picked up.
Wow.
You know, the thing though that I remember, you know, obviously parents and teachers were influencers, but for me, my father's love of nature was one that influenced me growing up. We lived in Manhattan at the north end of the island, you know, up in the Inwood Hill section, which is pretty much as far as you can go before you cross back over into the Bronx. And at the top of Manhattan Island, there's a park, and the park is Inwood Hill Park. And there were some very nice nature walks, and we used to call them Indian caves. Now I guess they're first American caves or something like that, but where the Indians used to live. When I grew up there, the actual chestnut tree that Peter Minuet sat under supposedly to purchase Manhattan Island from the Iroquois was still in that park with a fence around it. It has since died, but we used to go up into the woods there and just spend a lot of time walking and doing things. And you know, to trauma, you reminded me, Rabbi, that when I was probably about 5, I think it was, my parents both worked and sent me to day camp. And the day camp was at a congregation at the upper end of Manhattan. And I remember one day they took us, they were going to take us swimming. And of course you can't, you know, there's nowhere really to go, but there was, you know, public pools at the area. So they put us on the IRT train, the number 6, down to 145th Street someplace, and there was a pool down there. Now, one of the most favorite things I had to do as a kid was I used to like to stand in the front of the train and look out the window through the tunnel. And if anybody's been in New York as a kid, you know what I'm talking about. But what happened was that day I was so fascinated by what was going on that I turn around and the entire group is gone. And I'm down at 125th Street. I have my lunch in my hand. Fortunately, I have an excellent sense of direction. I could not read, but I knew that the stop I had to get off at was the first one after the train comes out of the tunnel onto the elevated track. So I walked up to the person in the what was then, I guess it wasn't a token booth then, because it was only a dime or so. And I told him I was lost and I had to get home. And he called the guy in the booth on the other side and told him to let me through. I had to go upstairs to 125th Street and Amsterdam Avenue and ask somebody to cross me because I wasn't allowed to cross on my own.
Oh my gosh.
Went down to the subway, got out, got off the train, walked home. We lived in an apartment building. I stood in the courtyard. I still remember this. And I'm yelling, "Mom," at the top of my lungs. My mother looks out the window and sees me and says, "What are you doing here?" And that's when I started to cry. So she lets me in the house, gets me upstairs, calls the camp. Meanwhile, the entire camp is frantic. They have no idea where I am. And nobody to this day could figure out how I ever got home, but I did. I managed to do that. So
That is an incredible story.
You were little.
I'm sorry.
That's incredible.
You know,
How old were you, Joe?
I was probably around 5 or 6 at the most.
That
Yeah.
is incredible.
Yikes. Can you imagine if that happened today? The lawsuit
Yeah.
that would ensue. That's unbelievable.
Just amazed that you did all that yourself and trying to figure out, which train is where and getting on it by yourself. I mean, that's pretty.
And that somebody like let a 5 and 6-year-old, who says I'm lost, cross the street and then put him on a train.
Even come home.
New York yet.
Fortunately, it was only one train, it was number 6. So at least I knew numbers. I knew that one was the one I had to get on. Because New York back in those days, the trains either had letters or numbers. So at least I knew that much. But I didn't know where I had to get off, and it was actually the Dyckman Street stop that I had to go off at. But it was the first stop after the number 6 train came out of the tunnel and before it crossed the river. So.
Do your kids know this story?
Yes.
Yeah, they know the story.
They must have heard it a million times. That and the fact that when he was little, he lost a pair of shoes.
Yeah, and one shoe.
One shoe.
My mother, we still have the.
We still have the one shoe.
Does it still fit?
No, it actually doesn't even fit on my toe. I don't think my mother, for some reason, we have my mother's hope chest out in the garage, and that shoe was in there along with the hair from my first haircut.
Yikes. I think you win the 0 to 7 award. Anybody want to try to top that? No. I do.
I have an interesting one that I can. When I was born in Montreal, and my parents were from there as well, and this was in 1945. So in 1947, the war is over, but my father was walking along a beach and he saw a sign that said "No dogs or Jews allowed." And my father went, "That's it." He came home, told my mother we're moving. And he was an electrical engineer and got a job at Philco in Philadelphia. And so we trekked to Philadelphia and lived all my life until I left home. But it was just realized why we were, later on, when I realized why we had moved. I had to give him credit for that.
Yeah. Mom, you want to tell, you have a parallel story. Sandy Copel? Oh, she's.
I'm sorry, I have myself muted because I have a lot of construction.
Oh, okay. But, did you hear what Len was talking about? No dogs or. So he was saying that his family moved because his dad saw a sign on the beach, no dogs and no Jews, and wanted to be in, a more Jewish friendly environment. And isn't that kind of part of your move from Kenilworth Place to Mill Basin?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was the only time I lived in a place that was not Jewish. And after that, I only lived in Jewish areas. I had gotten a house when I first got married that was right near Brooklyn College. And Bonnie was not allowed, my daughter, and was not allowed to go into some of the people's homes because we were Jewish. There was only one neighbor that she could go in to visit. And that was it. She had to wait outside on the street if she wanted to play with another kid. And that was pretty sad.
Yeah, so I don't have that memory, but I've heard the story.
Yeah, you had a next door neighbor to go next door to, but the other kids out on the street.
Anyone else have early memories of anti-Semitism?
Now, I lived in an area, well, in New York, where everybody was practically Jewish. The teachers were Jewish, the schools were closed for the Jewish holidays. So I really didn't have that experience as a young child.
I didn't meet a Protestant person until I think I was in college. I only knew Jews or Catholics because that's who you met in Brooklyn.
I remember, you know, when I met kids who were Protestant, my mom thought it was the most exotic thing because if you weren't Jewish, you were Italian Catholic.
You know, an interesting quick note on, and I wonder if anybody else had this experience too. You know, talking about the time we were 7, I just thinking about that. When I was 7, that's when we got our first TV set. Up until that time, we lived again in an apartment in New York, and we used to go to other people's homes to watch television. So, you know, on Thursday nights, we had a neighbor down the hall who invited us over to watch Milton Berle or, you know, other programs that we wanted to see. So I don't know if anybody else had that experience or not, but that was the way things were done back then. If you couldn't, you know, things were tough and TVs were expensive, so people shared them. If you had one, you invited people over. It was a social event.
Yeah, and if you wanted to see a show, you better be, you know, sitting in your seat watching that show when it comes on, because no such thing as a VCR or DVR or Netflix or, you know, streaming. You better just, that was a big event. You remember like when The Wizard of Oz came on once a year, the whole world shut down so everybody could sit and watch The Wizard of Oz. My mom is talking, but can't, yeah.
The screen was as large as my computer screen.
Looks like she's muted.
It was these little tiny things, and we all go around, you know, crowd around this one tiny little set.
So in my house, Joe, it's not that you had to go to the neighbor to watch TV. In my house, you had to go to the neighbor if you needed a Band-Aid. My mom is not the most nurturing person. She had no tolerance for illness. So, you know, if you had a stomach ache, the answer was when you come home from school, you'll lay down. And if you needed a Band-Aid, it was go next door and see if Eleanor has one. You had to borrow a Band-Aid. Consequently, my kids grew up with Costco-size boxes of Band-Aids in their cabinets, and still with the grandchildren now. I'm like very, very liberal with Band-Aids because I grew up deprived of Band-Aids.
Well,
So, I did want to respond to something Marie.
during the
What's that, Frank?
in the 6 or 7 years age group, radio was the thing that was our entertainment. So we would sit by the radio at 7:30 each night, listening to the Lone Ranger, and both my brother and I would dream what it would be like to live in the old Wild West. So coming to Arizona in '76, I was still expecting the Lone Ranger to be riding around town in Scottsdale because people told me that, yes, there are people out there riding horses up and down on the streets. So I basically living the dream of being in the wild, wild West.
Yeah. I was out in Scottsdale very, very early on Monday morning, and not a lot of traffic. Ron and I were driving, and a coyote ran right in front of us. And then I dropped him off at an appointment, and I was walking around, and a little family of javelina passed by. So you know, it's a little different from Manhattan. But I was going to say, just, you know, thinking about what Marie said and that first grade teacher, it's such a powerful reminder of the impact of a teacher, and not just a teacher, but anyone who's in a position of authority. It's important, I think, for rabbis as well, or anyone who's in that sort of influential position. You have to be especially cautious about what you say, because it has so much more power than something that is said in a more casual environment. So it really behooves the person who's in the authority position to be extremely thoughtful and sensitive about the exponential impact of their words, that here, 60, 70 years later, you can still remember. And I'm guessing that each of us, if we think about it, maybe not 0 to 7, but somewhere in our educational experience, a teacher may have said something that we still remember in a not so positive way. We were talking, Mom, about Mr. Ergo. So when I was in 5th grade, so now I'm moving on into the 8 to 14 age group, but when I was in 5th grade, I had Mr. Ergo, and I had a sharpened pencil, and I was bouncing it on my leg. I was tapping it on my leg, and a little piece of lead broke out and got lodged into the skin. And by the way, it's still there. You can still see that. And I remember raising my hand and telling Mr. Ergo that this had occurred. And he said to the class, "Oh, just ignore her. She's just looking for attention." So, as I said, the teacher role, it's such a vital role.
Mm-hmm.
So 8 to 14. So this is now like 3rd grade to 7th grade. What was going on in your life from 3rd grade to 7th grade? Significant moments and events, people who guided and influenced you, and how did that contribute to the continuum of your life? So I will say that's the age category where I decided I wanted to be a rabbi. So I was like the one freak kid who loved Hebrew school and loved junior congregation. And my parents tell me that it was when I was 11 that I first said I wanted to be a rabbi. And my dad, alav hashalom, was very, very great with numbers. He had this really savant capacity with numbers. And my parents always told me that he made a mental note of that, because he said, this is going to be important information to remember, that it was when I was 11 that I said, I want to be a rabbi. And, sure enough, I set the course, and I never wanted to do anything else. And here I am, 64, so I don't have that savant capacity with numbers. So what's that, 53 years ago?
Was there a particular rabbi that impressed you?
Yes, I really loved the Rabbi Murray Levine of my home congregation. I was very inspired by him. He was gentle and wise, and also he was very involved in what we would now call social justice. So as you heard my mom describe, we grew up in this very self-enclosed little Jewish community bubble, and he was very involved in interfaith dialogue, and that inspired me. That was just so exotic that he had these relationships with faith leaders in other faiths. That so 56, 60. So that would have been 1967 when I was 11 years old. So,
Because I've heard that there are some rabbis who really turn people off from Judaism. They would be very strict and smack them on the hand, and they never wanted to go back to Hebrew school. So,
no doubt.
Yeah.
Joel.
No, there's no question about it. Those were the most difficult years of my life, I think, in retrospect. When I was about 8 and a half, again, I was a big kid, and some kid jumped on my back at a Cub Scout after a Cub Scout meeting, and 2 days later I couldn't get out of bed. My left hip simply stopped working, and it began a number of years that I was actually crippled. I was diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, JRA, and my parents were, at the wit's end to try to figure out what to do. I literally couldn't walk. I was in a wheelchair and or braces and crutches from about 8.5 to my bar mitzvah had to be postponed. So until I was probably about 14. So probably in retrospect, the most traumatic years of my life. And not only because I was in a lot of physical pain and obviously incapacitated, but also a lot of mental and emotional pain, because I think we as human beings are the cruelest that we are, particularly 10 to 14, in terms of derision, in terms of being made fun of, because obviously I looked very funny and I couldn't participate in a lot of things. So those particular years at 72 now, I look back as being the most difficult years of my life, and also what probably formed me into being the tough guy that I really am, because it really motivated me to not just be normal, which was certainly the overwhelming feeling. All I wanted to do was disappear in a group of kids and nobody noticed me and just fit in. But I went way beyond that. It motivated me to really be excelling in everything I did, whether it was academically or, as it turns out, physically too later on. And so it was the best thing that ever happened to me, as well as the worst thing that ever happened to me during those particular years. But those were really painful years for me. And there were a lot of people that influenced me, including a orthopedic surgeon by the name of Albert Ferguson at Pittsburgh Children's Hospital, who told my parents, I still remember this conversation at about 12 and a half, that there was a new surgical procedure. He was a very young orthopedic surgeon, and that the only way I would ever walk again is if I literally had these procedures done on my ankles and my lower legs. And I was part of that kind of conversation, meaning I was there and him speaking very openly to my parents in front of me. And I still remember that conversation. And it was a combination of, they decided to go ahead with these surgeries, of abject fear, but at the same time, for the first time in years, hopefulness that, maybe I was going to be able to be normal again and recover. So anyway, that was my story.
Yeah, that's a lot to go through as a young person. You're certainly right. It's an age when everybody just wants to fit in and be accepted, and difference, there's no tolerance for difference. And now I like to think that there's some consciousness about bullying and the negative aspects of bullying. And I think schools are more aware of the negative consequences of that. But in our era, no, it was sink or swim.
Right. Either makes you strong or you don't survive. For me, there was never a choice.
Yeah,
Made me strong.
You survive, and it just has a very deleterious impact on your self-image.
No doubt.
You can just incorporate that negativity into how you look at yourself.
And by the way, Rabbi, that is the real motivation, not being 28 pounds overweight in kindergarten.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's a lot of dots to be connected to make you acutely aware of physical fitness.
Right.
Raise your hand if you had a
I'd
bar.
like to hear from Greg. Greg, tell us what's going on with you.
Raise your hand if you had a bar or bat mitzvah.
Well, as an adult.
As an adult.
What about between 8 and 14? So a majority not no.
I had a confirmation. I went to what's called girls' school, and I had a confirmation. And I was so mad. The year after my confirmation, they started bat mitzvah.
So for those who had a bar or a bat mitzvah, what was that like? Because, you know, who was saying a lot of people were traumatized. I think Sandy Kane was saying a lot of people were traumatized by their religious educational experience. Not always a positive thing. And one of the things I really try to stress to students and their families now when I'm teaching bar and bat mitzvah age students is to find that balance between working hard and having a sense of achievement versus, you know, we don't want to make the experience be about 9 months of being yelled at and harassed. And so that, you know, the old joke about the rabbi and the priest, they're talking about their buildings, and the priest is complaining that they have mice in the basement and they can't get rid of the mice. And the rabbi says, I'll tell you exactly what to do. We had the same problem. We gave them a bar mitzvah and we never saw them again. So, you know, that's what happens to a lot of people is they have this very traumatic bar or bat mitzvah experience. So what was that like for you? The people who did have a bar or bat mitzvah?
Yeah, for me, I remember that pretty much distinctly because I actually still have some video of that myself, which, you know, on some 8mm. I haven't converted those over yet, but the situation was at the time we still lived in Manhattan, and my parents sent me to Inwood Hebrew Congregation, which was a conservative Hebrew school, and I used to go Sundays and 4 days after school from the time I was in 6th grade up to the time I was bar mitzvah. But my birthday is in August, and so I remember my parsha was Shoftim, as a matter of fact, and it was Labor Day weekend. So that was when my bar mitzvah was. Now we, from the time I was 9 up until probably about the time I was 13 or 14, we used to go to what was then called a bungalow colony up in Oakland, New Jersey. Now Oakland today is a super suburban community. Back then it was nothing but farms and woodlands and so on. So it was really very rural. And the Ottos had what was once a vegetarian hotel and turned it into a bungalow colony. We used to spend the summers up there. So come Labor Day weekend, we drove back into New York. I had my bar mitzvah on a Saturday morning with family there, but my parents didn't have a whole lot of money. So the reception was the following, actually it was Labor Day Monday. And on the bungalow colony property, there was a big apple tree that my father had decorated with Chinese lanterns and hired an accordion player to sing the apple tree. And he went to Tabachnik's in Fairlawn, as a matter of fact. They still sell soups in the frozen section at the supermarket today, kosher soups, but it was a kosher deli in Fairlawn, New Jersey, and went and had them cater the affair. And so everybody came out, we set up tables, and he invited everybody in the bungalow colony plus our little family, and that was kind of my bar mitzvah at the time. So that's what I remember about it anyway.
My bar mitzvah consisted of.
Where was your bungalow colony?
It was in Oakland, New Jersey, up at the top. You know, up. It was off the Ramapo River, up in that neck of the woods, which is near Pompton Lakes and south east of Greenwood Lake. So it was down just off of 208 up there.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
I grew up in New Jersey, and I started going to Hebrew school 2 years before my bat mitzvah. At that time, they weren't even talking about bat mitzvahs, and my mother was 1,000% against anything like this. Back when I was in the first grade of my Hebrew school, when you graduated from the alphabet book, there was a little phrase everybody said, and then you got a little certificate. They made a whole big thing of it. Well, I said it wrong in front of all these people. And my mother made a big to-do about it, and she embarrassed me, and it was a whole big family thing. And so when years later, when it came time to do anything in front of anybody, when they said, "Oh, no, she can't do it, she can't do it." Okay. I went to the principal of the Hebrew school. I figured I got to go to Hebrew school, and I want to know what they're planning on doing. There I was, this little kid, and I talked to them, and they were just starting to talk about bat mitzvahs on Friday nights. And I wanted a bat mitzvah. I wanted to prove to the world and myself that I could do something. My mother kept saying, "No, you can't do it, you can't do it." Well, P.S., there was a whole big to-do between my mother and my father and the principal of the Hebrew school. I landed up being the 5th girl to have a bat mitzvah on a Friday night at the temple. Well, as most of you know, God bless me with wonderful vocal cords, and they took the mic away from me. I was bouncing the mic off the walls, and there's a friend of my mother's, this is so funny, who was in the bathroom while I was doing my Haftorah, and he told my parents, she didn't need a microphone. I was doing my thing, and I heard it perfect.
Well, it's so interesting, Carol, because it does show us the power of shame as an emotion. Again, the rabbis say that if you embarrass a person publicly, it's as if you committed murder, because you kill someone's soul, and it's that pain just never goes away. And it's amazing to me that you were then able to turn it around and advocate for yourself, that you wanted to prove your mom wrong rather than just internalizing that shame.
Well, I always grew up as the one that didn't need it, and I always got pushed in. It was like Dirty Dancing, when they pushed the young girl in the background all the time. That was me. I was the little one that was sit in the corner and don't say anything. Everybody's Mr. and Mrs. Until I had a fight with my mother, everybody was Mr. and Mrs. They weren't called by their first names. I was married with children already. And my mother said, "Oh no, you call them Mr. or Mrs." It was like I was still 6 years old. And my brother and I had a big fight when I was about 46 years old. And he said, "When are you going to grow up? When are you going to start living and doing things for yourself?" And I didn't realize what I was doing. And I just turned around one day and said, "That's it. It's time to live." And I have really worked very hard since I'm about 46 years old to do it. I never joined groups. I never went to camp. I went in school. I did belong to a chorus, and when they had their little programs, but my mother never came. It was too much. It was putting her out too much to come and see me in any of those. But I had a very difficult childhood with my mother.
Yeah, it sure sounds like it.
By the way, I just thought, since we were talking about that, I just thought I'd point this out. Carol always accuses me of being a pack rat and never throwing anything out, but I know where stuff is, what I needed.
Well, that's because you have the shoe that you lost as
in my house.
I have this. This is the chumash that I got at my bar mitzvah, and it's still inscribed in the front of the date here, August 31st, 1957, which was Labor Day weekend that weekend, and it's from the Sisterhood of the Inward Hebrew Congregation. So it's still with me after all these
my
years.
Bible.
I know you do.
Hack rat.
I have
It's about this big.
and Torah from my bat mitzvah too.
I have a
How
story to
many
tell.
of us really?
I have a story to tell that's similar to Carol's, actually. I attended a Reform congregation, and it wasn't that common for girls to have a bat mitzvah, whereas my friends who were conservative were having Friday night bat mitzvahs. And I wanted to have a bat mitzvah because I was interested in Judaism. I was interested in learning Hebrew. And my mother said, no, you're not going to have one because it's not traditional for a girl to have it. And your brother, my brother, who was 2 years younger, who couldn't have cared less about it, and to this day, he has no involvement in Judaism, had a bar mitzvah. And, you know, I was totally discouraged from it. And I had an adult bat mitzvah, but by then my parents were long gone. But yeah, it made a big impression on me.
Yeah, I had that conservative Friday night bat mitzvah, no Torah service, didn't have an aliyah, didn't read from the Torah. What they did in my generation was we would chant the Haftorah that was going to be chanted the next morning and just add that in to the Friday night service. And I was very sad that that congregation, years after my bat mitzvah, became even more traditional. So after my generation, the girls were allowed to have a Friday night bat mitzvah, but they could not say the Haftorah blessings. They just chanted the Haftorah, but couldn't do the blessing before and after. So,
I grew up
I
in
think,
a
my
mixed
wife
bag.
had-
My father
I think
grew up with no Judaism, no structured Judaism, but obviously European Jewish family. And it was critically important to him that his two boys be really, really exposed. We belonged to a classic turn of the century, a Reform temple in Pittsburgh, Rosh Sholem, where the Rabbi Solomon Freehoff was the president of literally the Worldwide Association of Reform Rabbis. And Dr. Freehoff was an iconic figure, but it was classic turn of the century. There were no bar bat mitzvahs. And
wow.
so my father deemed it critically important that my brother and I be bar mitzvahs. So we also belonged to the most frum place in Pittsburgh called Hebrew Institute of Pittsburgh, where nobody spoke a word of English. And it was run by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Abrams and his son, Solomon Abrams. And I still have scars, by the way, on my knuckles. This is how strict this place was in terms of being literally hit on the knuckles, making any mistakes. I was picked up from 5th grade on from my elementary school, after school by a Hebrew Institute bus, taken Monday through Thursday to this place, and had to figure out how to get home after dark. That's how many hours my brother and I were there. With my brother, it obviously stuck. He became a rabbi. With me, I couldn't wait for this to be over. And again, I was late in being bar mitzvah because of my illness. But after my bar mitzvah, I still remember the first Saturday morning after my bar mitzvah. You know, we had like 2 phones in our house, one downstairs and one in my parents' room. And my father came in and woke me up on a Saturday morning and said, "You need to go to Hebrew Institute." And I said, "What are you talking about? I'm done. And he said, no. We were Kohanim, and they needed a Kohanim to come to begin the Saturday service. And I remember him taking me and dropping me off like a block away, so it looked like I had walked all the way to go to services. And I hated that. I mean, I really, really despised that. And it really did turn me off to Judaism for a number of years afterwards. That ridiculous structure that I was exposed to.
Yeah, I think your experience is not uncommon.
All right.
Well, I had a wonderful
Can I make a
experience.
mention?
I wanted to learn Hebrew because I was bored in services. So there weren't many girls having bat mitzvahs at all. And I was taught by the rabbi, our Rabbi Ari Becker. And I remember him making a little cassette tape for me to learn by. And I can't remember if I read the Torah or not, but it was a Friday night service. And the only time I was unhappy was when during the service, my parents and I were, I guess it must have been one of the bruchas, and who was going to go first, who was supposed to say it first, them or me, and I was like, all right, I think it's your turn. And it was embarrassing, but I had a delightful experience.
Good to hear.
Can I mention something?
Please.
Can I mention something?
Yes.
I don't know how old. I think my wife has the, at least maybe amongst us anyway, her bat mitzvah when she was 63, 50 years after her. She had never been bat mitzvahed. And she got it in her head that she wanted to be bat mitzvahed. And here in Phoenix. And she did it. She did a phenomenal job. And we still have video. We have video of it with her and Maury and her sons. It was just a beautiful thing to watch. And when I first met Marcia, it was at a Pesach. It was at a Seder in Mexico, of all places. I had to go to Mexico to find a Jewish woman, and she was leading it because Maury had started the Chavurah in Mexico. And when he passed away, which was just months before this particular Seder, and she did a beautiful, beautiful job. But that was very interesting. So in our first date, I asked if I could watch her bat mitzvah service, and she definitely thought I was Meshuggah, wanting to watch a bat mitzvah service at the age of 63, but I did. And one other thing I want to say about my bat mitzvah, and bar mitzvah, I don't know if it relates to the others here, but from the age of 12 to 13, I was traumatized every day in fear that I wouldn't do a good job and disappoint my parents and make them ashamed. For me, I did it for my Bubby and Zadie's and my parents, just to make sure, and then praying to God every day that I could do a good job, which thank God I did. But it wasn't something I was excited about coming up to it.
Yeah. So you're validating what I said, that there can be a lot of trauma associated with it. On the other hand,
in my community.
Who's that?
Right.
I was just
in my community, which was kind of small, we still had a high competition with my fellow friends. And when we went to each other's bar mitzvah, we would keep track of how many mistakes each of us made during the bar mitzvah service. And so we kept a scorecard of each other. Thank God I only made 2 mistakes and I was on the low end, but I was very much reminded of the mistakes that I made. And the other thing I remember about my bar mitzvah, I took my first girlfriend. I invited my first girlfriend to my bar mitzvah and to the celebration at night. So it was a nice, fond memory.
That's nice, Frank. When we get to the exercise number 3, we're going to look at a bunch of first memories, and the first kiss is one of them. So we'll look forward to hearing that story. Mom, I don't know if you're aware that after my bat mitzvah, Stanley Fry came up to me and told me how many mistakes I made. It was 2 or 3, I don't remember, but like he had to make a point of telling me. Yeah.
That could be him.
That was my cousin's husband. So I think we're going to wrap up there. A lot of rich conversation. So some people got through their whole lifetime in an hour, and we're only up to age 14. But I hope it was as much fun for you to walk down memory lane as it was for me to hear all of this. So I'm going to suggest that we just continue with this program even for the next few weeks. So be thinking about 15 to 21, 22 to 28, and you know, it's really very enjoyable getting to know each other better through these memories that we have of those times in our lives. Any final thoughts on 0 to 14 or anything else that anyone would like to share before we say Lahitra?
No, I'm like Len. I don't think I ever got out of that.
Craig.
What?
I don't think I ever evolved past that age.
14?
Right, 14.
Len, are you?
12 here.
Yeah, Len, are you on the email distro list for this class? Do you get emails from me about this class?
No, but I would love to.
Yeah, what's your email address?
Lmerson, Lmerson, at living, Living, chaos, CHAOS, free, FREE.com.
Oh, that's a very interesting.
Thank you.
All right, here's to living chaos free. I will see you all next week. Socialize while distancing is tomorrow. If anybody wants to sign on for that, of course, Kabbalat Shabbat and Torah study. Sunday morning, lots going on. So if you need information for any of those events, be in touch. Otherwise, for sure, I'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good week.
Thank you, Rabbi.